Some people test the world with money the way children test water with a toe, certain the pool will always be warm for them. He strutted into the quiet restaurant with a laugh that didn't fit the room, fanning a stack of bills like a trick. "Bless this meal in Chinese and I'll pay 500,000, he joked, turning someone's culture into a dare. The elderly waitress didn't flinch. She set the bowl down, folded her hands, and began to speak in her mother tongue, soft, steady, and full of history. By the time she finished, no one was laughing, least of all the millionaire. Before we continue, if you believe that respect has nothing to do with money, but everything to do with the heart, then take a moment to hit that like button. It helps more people see stories like this one and reminds the world that kindness still matters. The restaurant wasn't fancy, not by the city's standards. It sat tucked between a closed bookstore and a laundromat that always smelled faintly of detergent and steam. Inside, the lights were soft, the tables mismatched, and the air carried the comforting mix of ginger, soy, and quiet conversation. For Mrs. Liang, it was home. She'd worked there for almost 30 years, first as a server, then as the kind of woman everyone trusted with the keys. Her hands were small and lined, her voice soft, and her English was careful, learned from the menu one word at a time. Most of the regulars called her Mama Liang, and though the years had slowed her steps, they hadn't dulled her grace. Every night before the doors opened, she'd light a small incense stick near the kitchen and whisper a quiet blessing. For the food, for the guests, for another day that had made it this far. Most people never noticed, but that was fine, she didn't do it to be seen. That Friday night, though, people noticed. It started when a group walked in just before closing. 4 men, mid-30s, loud enough to shake the calm off the walls. Their suits screamed money, their laughter reeked of whiskey. One of them, taller than the rest, with a gold watch that caught every light in the room, dropped his sunglasses on the table like he was setting down a crown. "Table for 4, he said, even though the sign said please wait to be seated. Mrs. Liang nodded, polite as always, and led them to the back booth. She handed them menus, offered water, and gave her usual smile, the one that had survived 3 decades of tired customers and half-hearted apologies. "Hey," one of the men said, tapping the table as she turned to leave. "Say something in Chinese, something. Cool." The others snickered. Mrs. Liang paused, unsure what to do. "Just, welcome," she said gently, bowing her head slightly. The man grinned. "Yeah, and how do you say thank you for rich customers?" Laughter erupted. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when they've learned it's safer to play along than to push back. "I just say thank you," she replied, and moved toward the counter. At the next table, a man in a gray jacket was stirring his soup slowly, watching the scene unfold. He looked like someone who preferred to stay invisible, calm eyes, quiet posture, no interest in attention. Jason Statham didn't come to places like this for attention. He came because it reminded him of something real. The laughter grew louder as the night went on. Mrs. Liang served dishes with the same steady hands as always, but the voices behind her grew meaner, jokes about accents, about old-fashioned service, about things that sounded funny only to people who'd never been humbled. Then it happened. When she brought out their final dish, a bowl of noodle soup, steam curling like smoke, the man with the gold watch leaned back in his chair. "Hey," he said, his grin too wide. "Before we eat, bless this meal in Chinese. Do it right and I'll give you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. $500,000. The table erupted again, laughter bouncing off the walls like cheap music. Mrs. Liang froze. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then to his face. There was no kindness there, just amusement, the kind that feeds on humiliation. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "I don't do that for money." The man smirked. "Oh, come on, it's just for fun. Say the words, make it fancy." Jason looked up from his bowl, his hands stilled. He didn't move yet, he rarely did, but his jaw flexed once and his eyes sharpened. Mrs. Liang shook her head. "I can bless your food," she said softly, "but not for the reason you think." "Perfect," the man laughed. "Go ahead then, bless the food, just make sure it's worth $500,000. She hesitated, her heart pounding. The restaurant had gone quiet now, even the kitchen light seemed softer. Slowly, she set her tray down, folded her hands together, and bowed her head. The men leaned back, grinning, waiting for a performance. Her voice came low and steady, Mandarin words that filled the air like music, old and sacred. No one in the room understood what she said, but there was something in the sound, a peace, a warmth that made the laughter fade. Jason closed his eyes briefly. He didn't speak Mandarin, but he didn't need to. You can tell when words are real. When she finished, she bowed once more and whispered, "Thank you for letting me serve." Silence. The man with the watch cleared his throat, forcing a laugh. "That's it. That's your $500,000 show." His friends chuckled weakly, but even they seemed unsure now. Something about the air had changed. Mrs. Liang only smiled. "A blessing is not a show, sir. It's a thank you." Jason set his spoon down. The sound was small, but it cut clean through the quiet. The man turned to him, defensive. "What you buying blessings to?" Jason's voice was calm, almost bored. "No, just wondering how small a man has to feel to measure respect in cash." The man scoffed. "You got a problem, mate." Jason looked at him, not with anger but with something heavier. "Not me, but I think you do." The man opened his mouth to reply, but Mrs. Liang spoke first. "Please," she said gently, "no need." Jason didn't argue. He just looked at her, then back at the man, and let the silence sit long enough to sting. The group finished their meal quickly after that, the noise gone, the laughter forced. When they left, the envelope still sat on the table, untouched. Mrs. Liang approached quietly, picked it up and placed it behind the counter. "Someone forgot this," she murmured. Jason paid for his meal, leaving double the amount. "You handled that well," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "I've seen many storms. You learn to stand in the rain." He nodded. "You shouldn't have to." That was all he said before leaving, a quiet exit, the kind that leaves a space heavier than before. But that wasn't the end. Because the next morning, the story wasn't just a story anymore. Someone had filmed it. A short clip had started spreading online, the arrogant dare, the quiet prayer, the man in gray who spoke one sentence and silenced a room. By sunrise, it had been shared thousands of times. People called her a saint. Others called him a hero. Mrs. Liang didn't see herself as either. She just showed up for her morning shift like always, wiping tables, humming softly under her breath. But around noon, a black car stopped outside the restaurant. And when the door opened, the man from the night before stepped out. He didn't have the envelope this time. He had flowers. Mrs. Liang froze when he walked in. The restaurant was quiet, the lunch rush not yet begun. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said quietly, "to you and to your language." She looked at him for a long moment. "You don't owe me that, sir." "I do," he said. "I didn't understand what you said last night. I looked it up. I had someone translate it." He swallowed. "You were praying for our families." Her eyes softened. "That's what blessings are for." He nodded, ashamed. "I spent half my life thinking I could buy peace." He looked down. "Turns out I just had to listen." She smiled gently. "Listening is harder than paying sometimes." He laughed faintly, a sound that carried more humility than humor. "Yeah, I figured that out." He reached into his jacket, not for cash this time, but a folded check. "I want to donate this to your community center, for the kids you help after hours." She blinked. "How do you know about that?" He smiled. "Someone told me." When she glanced toward the corner booth, Jason was sitting there again, quiet, unreadable, sipping tea. The man set the check down and stepped back. "Thank you," he said, "for last night." Mrs. Liang nodded. "Go make something good with the lesson." He smiled small, genuine, and left. Jason finished his tea, set the cup down, and walked toward the door. "You knew he'd come back," Mrs. Liang said softly. Jason paused. He just needed the right reason. And then with a faint nod, he left, the bell above the door ringing once, the sound soft and final. Morning slid into the neighborhood like steam off a kettle, quiet, steady, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. The laundromat's first cycle thumped a soft heartbeat through the wall. The closed bookstore's window caught a triangle of sun. And in the little restaurant between them, Mrs. Liang wiped each table as if the wood could feel it. The bell chimed once. A delivery boy set 2 crates of bok choy by the counter, gave a quick bow, and left. She signed the invoice with her careful, steady characters and tucked it into a drawer already sorted by months. 30 years will make you a student of small orders and smaller miracles. The clip had spread overnight. She hadn't meant it to. She didn't even know who recorded it. In the video, a gold watch flashed, a dare was thrown like a coin into a wishing well, and her voice, low, even older than she looked, poured out a blessing that didn't belong to any one person in the room. She prayed for mothers who worked double shifts, for sons with tired backs, for strangers who ate alone and didn't remember how to ask for help. Words she learned at a kitchen table so long ago, she could still smell the sesame oil on her mother's hands. The comments were a storm. Some people heard the prayer, some only heard themselves. None of it changed what she had to do at 6 in the morning: open the door, heat the broth, make rice. By mid-morning, she'd forgotten the internet existed, until the bell chimed again and he walked in. The man from last night, without the crowd this time, stripped of his noise. No watch on display, no swagger to fill corners. He held flowers like an apology with a stem. He spoke softly. He set a check on the counter, talked about listening, and glanced, just once, toward the corner booth where a quiet man in a gray jacket finished his tea. "It wasn't for money," she said when the man thanked her again. "It never is." He nodded and left without asking to take a photo. Jason watched the door swing shut, then rose and set his cup in the bus bin like a regular who knows where things go. "You knew he'd come back," Mrs. Liang said. "He came for the food last night," Jason replied. "He came for the lesson today." She smiled faint. Lessons are cheaper than they feel, more expensive than people think. He almost smiled. "Ain't that the truth?" He tipped his head and stepped into the late morning light, the bell giving its small, respectful goodbye. Outside, the block had woken. A bus sighed at the curb. A mother hustled a toddler past puddles that had survived the sun. Jason walked without hurry, hands in his pockets, like a man trying to disturb as little air as possible. 2 doors down, the laundromat owner leaned in the doorway, arms folded, eyes bright. "You see that video?" he asked no one in particular. "Hard not to," someone answered. Jason kept going. Fame, he knew, had the same gravity as trouble. It pulled everything into its orbit. Best not to feed it. He turned the corner and found the little community center stitched into the back street like a pocket someone once thought was temporary and then never took off. Hand-painted sign. 2 windows taped at the edges. A handwritten schedule announcing English lessons on Tuesdays and senior Tai Chi on Thursdays. He visited a handful of times without fanfare, sat with the Veterans Chess Club, carried boxes he didn't need to carry, fixed a hinge that had squeaked its complaint too long. Today he just stood in the doorway and listened. A woman in a cardigan organized picture books, a volunteer coached a small boy through the alphabet, an old man leafed through a newspaper that smelled like ink and patience. On the corkboard near the entrance, someone had already printed a screenshot of the video and tacked it with a note: "Be kind with your words. They feed people too." He nodded to the receptionist, a man who'd learned his kindness on the hard side of luck. "Morning," Jason said. "Morning," the man replied. "You hear about the check?" Mrs. Liang called, said a stranger left a blessing on paper. Jason lifted a shoulder. She undersold it. The receptionist smiled. She always does. They put the check in a plastic sleeve and slid it into a folder that had been waiting for a miracle under the name Roof Repair/Youth Programs. "We don't touch a cent," the receptionist said, "until we've got the board in a room and the dotted lines where they ought to be." Jason nodded like a man whose life had taught him when to push and when to let people steer their own ship. "If you need help reading the small print," he said lightly, "there's a lady 2 doors down who's good at translating important things." "Better than a lawyer," the man said. "Cheaper too," Jason added, and that was the closest he got to a joke before he walked back into the day. But word traveled fast and uneven, the way it does. Some people called the millionaire a clown and moved on. Some called Mrs. Liang a saint and missed the point. Stories grow teeth when you feed them, and this one was already chewing on things it shouldn't. Around lunch, 2 bloggers came to the restaurant with ring lights and entitlement. "Can you do the prayer again?" one asked, angling her phone. Mrs. Liang shook her head, a firm softness. "Blessings aren't for display." "So no reenactment," the other pressed. "Just a quick clip. Our audience is huge." She turned to refill a teapot. I'm busy feeding people. That's all the show there is. They hovered another minute like flies trying to decide between plates and then, sensing nothing sugary would be offered, buzzed back to the sidewalk. Not long after, two men in tailored jackets slid into a booth and whispered like they were ordering off-menu sins. They wanted access to the check, to her story, to the man in gray if she had his number. We represent Mr. Ellison, one said, like a psalm he'd practiced. We're putting together a statement, something warm, human, viral. It would help if you... No, she said, not sharp, just finished with that angle of life. I already said what I meant. They tried to leave a card. She wiped under their glasses and made it disappear with the sweep of a cloth. Jason wasn't there to watch, but he didn't need to be. He knew how people hunt. He'd seen pack behavior dressed in silk. He passed the front window once and saw the way Mrs. Liang's shoulders stayed relaxed. That was enough. You don't need to open a door to guard it. But that afternoon, during the quiet hour between lunch and dinner, the door opened to a gust of memory. A boy, no, a young man, 19 maybe, stepped in with a backpack, a haircut that tried not to be anxious, and a paper sticking out of his pocket like a white flag. He hovered near the counter until Mrs. Liang looked up. Sit, she said, in the tone kitchen people use when someone needs food before they need to explain themselves. He sat. She poured tea. He stared at the steam like it might assemble his courage. Your video, he blurted finally, then winced at his own directness. I watched it with my grandma, she cried. He swallowed. She hasn't prayed in Chinese since my mom passed. Mrs. Liang's face softened. Sometimes language is a door, sometimes it's a key. He pulled a single sheet from his pocket and unfolded it carefully. The paper shook. I got accepted, he said, as if it surprised him. University of Michigan business program. Need to send the deposit by Friday. If I don't, I lose it. He looked down. I've been delivering food for my uncle, taking extra shifts. It's still short. Mrs. Liang knew the math a glance could do. The cost of a dream divided by hours you can't afford to work. I'm not here to ask, he said quickly, embarrassed by a need he couldn't tidy. I heard the center might get donations. Maybe I can help them do something, anything. Not a handout, work. She poured more tea. What's your name? Daniel. What did your grandmother pray? She asked, and Daniel blinked at the question, surprised by the true door she had chosen. He smiled, a little broken around the edges. She thanked my mom for teaching her to say, I love you before the house got quiet. He sniffed and laughed at himself. And she asked whoever's listening to send me someone kind enough to double-check the forms so I don't sign my life away. Forms are tricky, Mrs. Liang agreed, even the ones that say they're simple. The bell chimed. Jason stepped in with that kind of timing a day sometimes gives you if you've earned it. Ah, Mrs. Liang said, not at all surprised. Here is someone who reads before he writes. Jason paused, assessing. He didn't love being nudged into moments, but he trusted the nudger. Afternoon, he said to Daniel, then to Mrs. Liang. Am I interrupting? You're arriving, she said. Sit. Jason sat. He listened while Daniel explained in fits and starts, piecing a life from the kind of details you don't expect strangers to hold. Jason handled the paper like it might bruise. Let's go through it, he said, line by line. They did. Half an hour later there was a plan, boring, honest, doable. 2 local grants with deadlines that hadn't passed because a kind receptionist at the center said so. A fee waiver application. A list of weekend shifts at the community center that came with a stipend not printed in any brochure. Still leaves a gap, Daniel said, small, embarrassed by the space between effort and enough. Jason nodded. I've got a friend who runs a trade scholarship. They like ambition that tells the truth. He slid his phone over. Write your number. You don't even know me, Daniel said. The reflex humility of someone whose life had taught him to earn yeses nobody was offering. Jason shrugged. I know you brought the paper. Daniel laughed in relief. Thank you, he said, the words raw enough to be new again. Pay it forward, Jason answered, because clichés keep their shape when you use them for the right reasons. He left a little while later, after promising Mrs. Liang he'd swing by the center for the board meeting. He'd sit in the back, say nothing, watch carefully. It's what he did best. But the millionaire, Mr. Ellison, didn't disappear, though he seemed to want to. His PR team begged for a staged reconciliation. He said no. Then they begged for a caption he didn't write. He said no again. He went for a walk instead, left his watch on the dresser, and called his mother, who asked him when he'd last volunteered without a camera. That evening he came back with an idea that had the decency to be quiet. He didn't bring film crews. He brought 6 envelopes, each with tuition receipts or past due notices paid. He left them with the center under one condition: the families wouldn't learn who sent them. They should think the world is kinder than it is, he told the receptionist, who nodded as if this was the first true thing he'd heard from the man. When he stopped by the restaurant a third time, he arrived before dinner rush and waited by the door like a student asking permission. "I want to apologize," he said to Mrs. Liang, "in the language you used, but I don't trust my mouth to say the words right." She nodded, "Then show them instead." He did, not with a speech, with service. He spent 2 hours taking out trash and loading crates while ignoring the phones buzzing in his pocket. He misstacked boxes. He almost dropped a tub of broth. He learned where to stand in a small kitchen without getting in the way. At one point, he looked up to find Jason watching him from the corner like a ghost with opinions. "Evening," Ellison said, wiping his hands on a towel. "Evening," Jason returned. "This what you do?" Ellison asked quietly. "Show up, say one sentence that sticks, then disappear." "Depends on the day," Jason said. "Depends on the sentence." "You could have humiliated me," Ellison said, voice low. "Would have been easy, you didn't." "I've been humiliated before," Jason replied. "Doesn't teach the right lesson." Ellison nodded, the kind of nod you give a map that's finally in the right language. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Jason said. "Say grace when nobody's filming, that's thanks." He pulled his jacket tighter and slipped out before Ellison could decide whether to stick out his hand. Some men mistake handshakes for absolution. Jason offered neither. The board meeting at the center wasn't dramatic. Most important meetings aren't. 5 people sat on mismatched chairs while a fan clicked. They read the donated check twice, looked at the legal copy a friend from the library had supplied, and voted to allocate funds exactly where Mrs. Liang had hoped: half to the food pantry and after-school tutoring, half to the roof and electrical work that had been deferring its own prayer. Jason sat in the back. He didn't speak until they thanked the anonymous donor and the not anonymous neighbor. Then he said 3 things. First, he began, don't spend it fast just because you have it. Make a list. Let the quiet needs talk. They're usually the ones you miss. Second, keep receipts like they save lives. Paperwork gets lost when good people are busy. Third, he paused, gentler, the story will fade next week. Keep feeding people the week after. They nodded. You don't need celebrity to hear good advice. You just need to have run out of excuses. On his way out, he passed a bulletin board where a child's drawing had been added. A woman with silver hair holding a bowl, a speech bubble in squiggly characters that said thank you in 2 languages. Next to it, a small Polaroid, Daniel and his grandmother grinning, the university acceptance paper held like a flag. Someone had written in blue marker, deposit sent. Roof next. Keep going. He smiled, the rare kind that actually reached his eyes, and kept walking. But not every ripple was kind. A pair of trolls from a radio show came by late one night and tried to pick a fight under the neon. Say the blessing, lady, one taunted, cheap grin in place. We'll react to it live. Mrs. Liang was counting the till. The night cook, a man who'd learned patience on 2 continents, was mopping with his headphones on. The place was nearly empty, the light mostly reflections. Jason had no reason to be there except that sometimes you know when to be on the right block at the right hour. He leaned in the doorway and let them see him before he said a word. They recognized his face and felt the heat of their own joke. Suddenly it wasn't a bit. It was a decision. They made the right one, backing out with the fake laughter of men who'd met the edge of their courage and decided not to lean. He didn't tell Mrs. Liang. She didn't need protection she already had. He just waited until the mop bucket squeaked a new clean square into the floor and said, "How's your son?" She looked up, surprised at the turn. Jason had a way of moving conversations into rooms that mattered. "Tired," she answered. "He picks up maintenance shifts at night. Says he's saving for a real place with a real door and a window that doesn't stick in the winter." Her eyes went soft. "He tells me to quit. I tell him I will when these hands forget how to measure salt without a spoon." Jason's smile lived mostly in the corner of his mouth. "Hope the window opens easy," he said. "I'll make sure it does," she replied. But a week later, the online storm had become a drizzle. New outrage, new miracle. The restaurant kept cooking. The center patched its roof. Kids learned how to say please and thank you in a language that felt like part of their own. Daniel sent a text with too many exclamation points when the scholarship came through. Mrs. Liang taped it under the register like a promise that had learned how to sit still. On a quiet afternoon, when the light fell just right and the tea smelled sweeter than usual, she found Jason at the corner booth again, not hiding, just resting. She brought 2 bowls, one for him, one for the empty seat across from him that had been her husband's favorite before his heart decided to tell a different story. "Eat," she said, "it helps." They ate in a comfortable quiet. After a while, she said, "Do you want to know the words I used that night?" He shook his head gently. "I know what they meant." "What did they mean?" she asked, "because it matters how someone answers." "They meant," he said, looking out the window where life went by without applause, "that food tastes better when you remember it comes from more hands than yours." She nodded, pleased. "Good." He set his spoon down carefully. "You're all right, you know that." She chuckled. "I'm old, which is the same thing sometimes." He stood, pulled a few bills from his pocket, and left them under the edge of the bowl like always, too much, never showy. He moved toward the door, paused, and looked back. "Keep the check anonymous," he said. "Let the kids think it was the city being kind." She tilted her head. "And you don't want thanks." He shook his head. "I don't like the taste." "Then take this," she said, producing a small red envelope from her apron, the kind given at New Year, good luck folded into paper. His name wasn't on it, just a character for long life written by a hand that had learned steadiness through practice, not calm through ease. "It's too much," he said automatically, a man who tried to learn how to accept small gifts and still struggled. "It's tea money," she said, "and an old woman's insistence." He took it with both hands because some responses you don't polish with extra words. "Zai zai," he said, his accent clumsy, his gratitude correct. "Bukichi," she answered, "don't mention it." He stepped into the late afternoon. The bell gave its single sound. The door shut behind him with the soft thump of a place that knew how to close without closing off. But that evening, the community center hosted a small dinner, long folding tables, too few matching chairs, a potluck that had somehow choreographed itself into balance. The kids made paper lanterns. Someone brought a portable speaker that worked as long as no one touched it. The roof didn't leak. That alone felt like a blessing spoken in wood and nails. No plaque got unveiled. No speech tried to own the moment. The receptionist stood and said, "We fixed the roof. We're keeping the tutoring program. If you need food, take it. If you have extra, leave it. If you've got a talent, teach it. If you've got time, lend it. That's the whole plan." People clapped in the way people clap for something that is finally, plainly right. Near the door, Ellison stood in a jacket that didn't seem to recognize him anymore. He watched the room like a person who'd taken off a too-tight shirt and wasn't sure who he was under it. He didn't approach Jason. He didn't approach Mrs. Liang. He just carried chairs for 2 hours, then slipped out. Jason noticed anyway. He also noticed the kid Daniel teaching a younger boy how to fill out a library card application without feeling dumb. He noticed Mrs. Liang explaining to a woman from the laundromat that she could ask the rice cooker to make enough for tomorrow, and this wasn't charity. It was a neighborhood functioning as designed. He left before dessert. He always did. The best endings, he believed, didn't accompany him to the door. They stayed where they belonged. On his walk home, the street didn't hold its breath. It breathed the ordinary, honest air of a city learning something and trying, imperfectly, to keep it learned. He passed the closed bookstore and imagined the stories inside doing their night work, waiting. At the next corner, someone had chalked a sentence on the sidewalk in big, wobbly letters. "Be nice to the chef. She knows where the prayers are hidden." He smiled because he couldn't help it. He didn't say the blessing out loud. He didn't need to. He carried it in the ordinary way, by letting the world be a little quieter around him, by stepping into rooms and refusing to take more space than his body needed, by leaving enough on tables that had fed him longer than he deserved. The night folded itself around the small restaurant, the laundromat's thump fading, the city's pulse settling into its own slow rhythm. Inside, Mrs. Liang counted her till, taped Daniel's text to the underside of the register, and said a prayer under her breath for the strangers she'd never meet who would eat tomorrow because of what happened yesterday. It wasn't $500,000 that made the difference. It was the thing that cost more. Humility, offered late but offered real, attention paid on time, respect returned with interest. Some stories end with a check. The good ones end with a table that's still set, a roof that doesn't leak, and a door that opens easily when the bell rings. Jason crossed the street toward the dark, and the city, unimpressed and grateful, let him go without asking for a photo. He preferred it that way.